Hello and welcome to episode 74 of Question and Answer. I am your host, Panyo Basa, and I'm going to be nervously looking at this thing to make sure it's really recording because last time I had to do it twice because the first time it didn't record for mysterious reasons. And anyway, we've got a moderate amount of questions to ask, just covering pretty much the full spectrum of questions to ask. And so I might as well just wade right into it. And the first question is from Austin. And Austin says, in some sense, I feel disillusioned to society and it grows ever present more and more every day. Like I'm trapped inside a vessel, watching my life go by, almost like a child strapped in the back seat of a car, watching the road pass with no further destination in mind. Is this good? What should I do? I feel like this would be a good quality to have if I was a monk. Well, disillusionment is essentially nibbida in Pali, and it's like the first step towards enlightenment. There's like three steps. There's nibbida, which means like disillusionment, or just being fed up. Second is viraga, which is dispassion, and third is vimukha, which is liberation. So, I mean, yeah, from a spiritual point of view, it's probably good to be disillusioned with society, to be fed up with the world, or just lose interest in the world, not want to participate much anymore. Although it's kind of interesting what he says when he describes the state, like I'm trapped inside a vessel watching my life go by, almost like a child strapped in the back seat of a car watching the road pass with no further destination in mind. That reminds me of mental states that I've had a lot, both as a monk and as a layperson, even as a kid, where you're just watching the world like on a movie screen. It's almost like you're just completely detached from it. You're just watching it on a screen, and it's like some kind of virtual reality that you can't fully buy into. And so, yeah, from a spiritual point of view, that's good. From a worldly point of view, it's probably counterproductive because they want you to be like gung ho working for the team and all that. So, what should you do? I mean, it does indicate that if you're just getting fed up with this world or disillusioned with this world, it may be time to, step up the game, move on to something next. It's like what you're doing now isn't really, I mean, I almost said it isn't really satisfying you, but I mean, nothing that you can possibly do will really satisfy you because that's the first noble truth of Buddhism. But yeah, try something different. Try something maybe just a little more consciousness raising or something. I won't encourage you to try psychedelics. Probably already have anyway. Let's see. What else? What other advice? I mean, there's really not much advice that I can give other than just, be mindful of it, be aware of the situation, to try to understand the situation as well as you can, be as conscious as you can in any situation that you find yourself in. And that's about the best you can do. So I think I'll just move on to the next question here. This is from Fred. And Fred says, is it the purpose of Buddhism to wipe the slate of cognition clean? And I mean, that's not really the ostensive purpose of Buddhism. The ostensive purpose of Buddhism is to free yourself from dukkha or suffering, or to free yourself from delusion. But wiping the slate clean of, wiping the slate of cognition clean. Yeah, there's various ways of interpreting that. I suppose when you're in a jhana state, that's what you'd be doing temporarily. But if you're becoming enlightened, the slate of cognition probably won't be wiped clean so much as it'll just be sort of neutralized. It just won't have the same effect that it used to have because you're not identifying with it anymore. So I think I'll just move on to Fred's next question here, which is as follows. I think a lot of people like hippies think Buddhism leads to a blissful state. Would they be misguided in this respect? So are there still hippies in the world? I mean, there'd probably be really old hippies. I mean, you can't really be a young hippie, can you? I mean, there's hipsters, which are very different. Huh. I mean, there's like flower children still walking around with like bell bottoms and flowers embroidered on their jeans and bare feet and love beads. Yeah, they'd probably be like in their 70s or 80s at this point. But let's just get to the question here. I think a lot of people, like hippies, think Buddhism leads to a blissful state. Would they be misguided in this respect? Well, I mean, again, if you're in a state of jhana, that could be a state of bliss. Um, I mean, like the Hindus especially consider like Brahman, the attainment of Brahman, to be like Sat Chitananda, which is like true bliss of mind. But Buddhism really doesn't describe it as bliss. I think you can find it in the texts, um, but it's mainly more of a negative description in early Buddhism, where it's just the cessation of suffering. And if you want to call the cessation of suffering or unease bliss, you got no unease, that would be, presumably a blissful state. It'd be an equanimous state, a contented state. So, yeah, I guess you could call it blissful. Although, bliss as like a positive pleasure, yeah, it wouldn't lead to that. I mean, it can lead to that, but that's not the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is just to completely transcend positive and negative states. So, I think I answered that one, so I'll just move on to Fred's third question here. And Fred's on a roll. He's asking them questions. And his third question is, I have given up on the monk route. It's beyond me. I went through a real downer accepting this. The mind played many tricks recently. So, how can one cope with a negative mind narrative that thinks it's in the driver's seat? Well, be mindful of it and detach from the negative mind narrative. I mean, that's the best you can do. And it takes practice. You have to just keep practicing. It's like playing the piano or something. Don't just sit down and start doing it. It takes a lot of practice. And mindfulness also takes a lot of practice, unless you're just some kind of prodigy that has an innate talent to be mindful. But that's relatively rare. Maybe in India or something, you'll find people like that. At least in higher numbers than you'll find them in the United States, for example. So, how can one cope with a negative mind narrative? I mean, mindfulness is the panacea. It's the cure-all. It's good for whatever ails you. And any kind of negative mental states, you just observe it. Negative mental state is arising. But again, it takes practice. But when you observe a mental state, you mindfully note it, you create this detachment. It's no longer you anymore. It's you, if you're anybody at all, is the one who's observing it. So there's already this detachment. It's not you anymore, and you weaken it. You don't completely abolish it, but you're like taking the wind out of its sails, so to speak. You're making it so that when it happens again through force of habit and again through force of habit, that it'll be weaker and weaker because you're not reinforcing it. Sort of like the stray dog that keeps showing up in Thailand. And if you feed it even just a little bit every once in a while, it'll just keep coming back. But if you just don't feed it, it'll eventually just give up and go away. And defilements are like stray dogs. So I'll just move on to the next question. And this is from PSA. And PSA says, how does a serious Buddhist protect oneself from bullying? It appears that when a person is seriously following the precepts and following right speech, it is almost impossible to fight back, and one's only weapon is to walk away from difficult and abusive situations. But walking away is not always an option, especially for people living in a house with other people or for people with a job in similar situations. What do you recommend? How can a Buddhist fight back without destroying the practice? Or is it just impossible and one must simply endure the abuse while maintaining perfect morality? It might sound like I'm asking many questions, but it's only one question. How does a serious Buddhist protect oneself from bullying? Well, there are various ways of going about it. I mean, one is just do as much good as you can so that you have good karma, so that bad things are less likely to happen to you, but still bad things will happen to you sometimes. So, I mean, it's PSA here does differentiate between bullies that you can avoid and bullies that you can't avoid or that are very difficult to avoid. And I think that the approach you would take would vary. Like, let's just discuss bullies you can avoid. Just for starters, let's say you just happen to be you walk into the wrong kind of bar, but if you're a good Buddhist, you won't go into that situation anyway. But you walk into the wrong kind of a bar, and this biker dude just takes an instant dislike to you and starts pitching shit at you. Well, what you do is you do not, like, see, how do I put it? I mean, you don't put anything into the interaction. You don't feed any kind of negativity into it. That you just try to be good natured, answer his questions or whatever. You know, he's like picking fun at you, but you just don't take the bait. It reminds me of this movie that George Clooney was in it, like The Men Who Stare at Goats, and it's based on a true story that the army was experimenting with people that were using like mind powers to deactivate violence, and it works the way they were doing it. It's just you just don't add anything to the interaction, and it can just peter out because the person's not getting the feedback that they're looking for. But I mean, it doesn't necessarily always work, but it has worked fairly well for me in the past. But again, you've got the situation where it's like a domestic situation at home, or your boss is an asshole or something. What do you do in a situation like that? Well, I mean, for starters, you just continue trying to be a good person, not feeding anything into it if you can avoid it. And also, I mean, the traditional approach, the Buddhist approach to a situation like this, if you're dealing with like a chronic, I wouldn't say enemy, I mean, it could be an enemy, or it could just be like a person who's just hard to get along with, is sin metta. So you just make a part of your meditation practice just beaming love at that person. And it actually does work if you're good at it. You might not even have to be extremely good at it. And like if some person is just so horrible that it's really difficult to beam love at them. There was a monk in Burma. I can't remember his name now, but he invented. I assume he invented. Maybe somebody else taught it to him. It's called the pebble method of sending metta to somebody that's really hard to send metta to, where you just find this round, smooth little pebble, and you name it the same name as this person that's causing trouble for you. And every day you make this little ritual of you put it into a little glass of cold water, cold, clean water. And then you say, just as this pebble is surrounded by cool, clear water, may so and so be surrounded by peace. Because, I mean, a lot of people find it really difficult to send love to somebody who's making it hard, giving them a hard time. But the fact is, anyone who is deliberately making trouble for other people is an unhappy person. Happy people tend not to fuck with other people. They don't mess with other people. It's live and let live if a person is happy. It's when they're unhappy that they want to mess with people. It's like Tiberius Caesar. Just sometimes he enjoyed watching people get tortured. I mean, there's other, like, apparently Chairman Mao was like this too. Or other people, let's see who else. Not that it matters, I guess. Valentinian the Great of the late Roman Empire was also like this, where they get entertainment from watching people get tortured. And they had to be, deep down, miserable, messed up people in order to get pleasure from seeing somebody who is more miserable than they are. I mean, that's really what it boils down to, is they're miserable. And so, I mean, even though they might be smiling on the surface, deep down, they're messed up. They're unhappy. And so at least they can look at someone who's more unhappy than they are and consider themselves to be relatively happy, even though they're not really all that happy. So the point I'm getting to is it's unhappy people that want to mess with other people. And so if you can help to make them happier, even just like secretly beaming love at them without saying anything about it, or just, do something, go out of your way to do something nice. I mean, if they're really an asshole, they'll just complain about how you didn't do it right or something. But still, I mean, that's about the best you can do, unless if the situation is just intolerable. You're just completely being harassed at work by your boss. It might be time to find another job. Or if the home situation is horrible, unless you're like a little kid, then, I mean, if it's really, really bad, it's like a living hell, then, I mean, you can just use the door. So, and ultimately, with regard to fighting back, even an ordained monk is allowed to strike out in self-defense. If someone is like physically assaulting you, then you can do essentially whatever is necessary to eliminate the threat. Although you shouldn't be trying to kill somebody. But if you're just trying to save your own skin, then yeah, pretty much anything goes in a situation like that. Well, although that's like desperate last resort. And if a person is really saintly, they'd probably just rather get killed than kill somebody else. So I think I'll just move on to the next question here. This is from Siovach and Sipad Zidana. And if I didn't answer the bullying question well enough, I do apologize. I mean, I have been in situations like that when I was a kid. I'm kind of a big guy, and nobody's really tends to mess with me much anymore. But yeah, I mean, it is a sensitive subject. It's not a good situation to be in if you're just like a victim. I don't like the word victim. It's totally overused. But yeah, I mean, there are things you can do that don't necessitate being just flagrantly immoral. So again, I'll just move on to this question here. And this is from Siovach and Sipad Zidana. And he says, what makes a good meditation session? How do I know if I had one? I can understand obvious things like being able to be undistracted for long periods and such, but other than that, it's pretty vague. Yeah, well, I mean, just the whole idea of a good meditation session is pretty vague, isn't it? But yeah, I mean, a good meditation session would be one in where you're actually meditating. So long as you're actually meditating, it's a good meditation session. But if you're sitting there and then like all of a sudden you realize that for the past 20 minutes you've just been thinking about food or titties or something, then yeah, that's not good. You're not meditating. Your mind is just wandering around. So long as you're actually meditating, you're noting whatever comes up. If you're doing the Mahasi method, for example, nothing in particular is coming up. You're just watching the breath going in and out, or watching the abdomen, expanding and contracting. Then you're actually meditating. I mean, if you get piti, if you're just like really enthusiastically meditating and doing it well, then that's even better. But I mean, any meditation session where you're actually meditating pretty much all the time, then I would consider that a good meditation session. I mean, you don't have to be getting into jhana or anything to have a good meditation session. So I think I'll just move on to Siovach and Sipad Zidana's next question here. Tip on increasing ability to sit in meditation longer without bodily pain, without having to shift positions. Well, that's two different things. Being without bodily pain and being without having to shift positions, because like the Mahasi method back in the old days, they used to say, no matter how bad it hurts, even if you think you're going to die, you should not shift positions. That pain is the friend of the meditator. Pain is the key that unlocks the door to Nibbana. That's what the Mahasi method used to say up until like spoiled, pampered Westerners started flooding in and like complaining about how they didn't have cushions and stuff. But I'm not exactly sure how Siovach and Sipad Zidana sits. I used to always sit in the full lotus position, which is relatively painful after a while, I have to admit, but my legs are not very flexible. And I did come across articles like in yoga magazines, and I'm sure you can find this on the internet, um, like tips on how to sit in the full lotus or whatever position you're sitting in, um, more easily to increase your flexibility so that the full lotus is easier. And I mean, if you can sit in the full lotus, I would definitely recommend it. And I mean, it keeps your ankles off the floor, for example. I mean, if you're sitting in the easy position, also called the Burmese position, with your feet kind of like one in front of the other, not actually crossed, but just kind of both on the floor, then I mean, your ankles can rub up against the hard floor, which causes pain that way. But I mean, if you're sitting in the full lotus, then your feet and your ankles are resting on top of the alternate thigh. And I mean, still, you're going to have sore ankles just from the pressure, the twisting, and the sore knees and maybe sore hips. But with increased, I mean, just bear with it. And with practice, it doesn't hurt so much. And if you do the stretches and asanas or whatever that the yoga people say, that probably will make it easier. So I guess that would be it. But don't totally wimp out and start sitting in a chair. That's not cool. Unless, I mean, your legs are so crippled up, you just cannot sit cross-legged. But the closer you can get to the full lotus, it's just going to automatically boost your meditation by at least 3%, just being in the full lotus. I'm not exactly sure why. I'm sure the yoga people would have, some explanation regarding, the spine, the kundalini or the spinal cord is straight or whatever, is more straight. But it seems to me that if you sit in the full lotus, you're more likely to sit up straight. It's conducive to a good posture. And also, it may be that when your legs are like folded up like a pretzel like that, it reduces blood flow to your legs, which would then like increase blood flow to your head, and like maybe more oxygen would make you more conscious or something. But yeah, that would be my main advice, with no formal. Oh, wait, that's not it. That would be my advice, like on being able to sit in meditation without bodily pain, would be to, find some yoga article or yoga video telling you what stretches to do so that you can sit in meditative posture more easily. And I mean, without bodily pain, I mean, I don't know. I've sat through a hell of a lot of bodily pain. I mean, sometimes I was sitting like when I was listening to a speech by U Pandita once, Mahasi U Pandita, and I was sitting there, probably in the full lotus, up front where everyone could see me, and I mean, he was just talking and talking and talking until finally it's like my legs are just in screaming pain. I'm just like shaky and sweaty because just of the agony I was going through, and I was no longer really even listening to what he was saying. I'm just hoping that he'll just get done, just like begging him, if you can read minds, please just hurry up and end this discussion. So let's see, it's kind of a digression, isn't it? I don't even know what got me off on that. Let's see. Oh yeah, the bodily pain part. I mean, bodily pain is not necessarily something to be avoided. I mean, if you can learn through practice how to observe pain mindfully, you can even make it a meditation object. Like when I was at Pandita Rama, I was getting pain a lot just from all the sitting that had to be done. And you just sit down and maybe do the abdomen for a little bit until the pain starts, and then you can just sit there and meditate on pain, note the pain, because it's really an obvious meditation object. I mean, it's just glaringly obvious. So it's in a way, it's kind of hard to drift your mind away from the pain, other than just maybe drifting into like these desires for the pain to stop, or maybe I should get up or change positions or something. So yeah, try the yoga stretches. So I'll just move on to Siovaksh and Sipad Zidana's third question, which is, I noticed when I meditate throughout the day with mantras and no formal sitting, not concentrating that much, my head feels a slight pressure after a while. Is this a sign I should stop? What does it say? And I really am not in a position to speak with authority on this subject. it could be that just doing the mantras, if you're voicing it like for hours and hours, it could cause a certain amount of head pressure, like blood pressure, just because of what you're doing with your throat and mouth and so forth. But the only thing I've ever read about having head pressure while meditating was in an old Ram Dass book, and he was talking about how when he was in India, he was getting like this weird head pressure when he was meditating, and he went to his teacher about it, and his teacher said it's because of all the acid you took, that it's caused a kind of weird energy blockage in your mind or in your brain or something. So, I mean, it's just something that I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean that you should stop. Even pain doesn't mean that you should necessarily stop, unless it's like seriously messing up your leg or something, your sciatic nerve or something. So let's see here. See, I notice when I meditate throughout the day with mantras and no formal sitting, not concentrating that much, my head feels a slight pressure after a while. Is this a sign I should stop? I don't think it's a sign that you should stop. What does it say? I'm not exactly sure what it says, but I'm pretty sure it's not saying that you should stop. So I think I'll just move on to the next question here. Sorry, I'm no authority on head pressure and meditation. Gotta admit. So the next question is from Toronto Nat. And Toronto Nat says, with such a small presence that's largely confined to the virtual realm, does alt-Buddhism really stand a chance? If so, what does the future of alt-Buddhism look like? So does alt-Buddhism really stand a chance? I mean, so long as you've got one person who's essentially an alt-Buddhist, and I'm not exactly sure what Toronto Nat is referring to with regard to alt-Buddhism. I mean, I've written an essay about alt-Buddhism that's on my blog. That was back when alt-right was kind of a thing. The alt-right rarely gets mentioned anymore, and almost always in derogatory terms, which generally means that the mainstream propagandist attack on the alt-right by equating them with Nazis and so forth essentially worked. But getting back to the question here, does alt-Buddhism really stand a chance? I mean, if one person is practicing something, successfully, they're making progress, they're getting benefits from doing it, then still it's okay. But I assume he's talking about a social movement, or at least a movement within Buddhism that is sort of conservative, traditionalist, but nevertheless still like Western in its attitude. Yeah, I mean, let's see. He's got another question here that's kind of a continuation of this. Maybe I should have combined it all into one. But what does the future of alt Buddhism look like? It's hard to say exactly. If you've got some charismatic leader who really causes the thing to take off, but at present, for the foreseeable future, it's just going to continue pretty much the way it is, which is mostly online, because there's just not enough of us that, I mean, not all of us, not enough of us in like concentrated into one area, that really having temples and like meditation halls and so forth in like brick and mortar buildings, it just doesn't seem very realistic, unless maybe you got like a Western monastery with a Western monk who might just be specifically invited to just come and live at this monastery. You got a few people that have similar views. They live close enough together. They got enough money that they can set up some kind of little cabin, maybe a little Dhamma hall, and invite a Western monk to come and stay there, that they consider to be strict in his practice and has some wisdom, can teach meditation. Then yeah, that would be fine. And I've heard a lot of people talking about it, but it doesn't happen very often, largely because there's just not enough people with the same point of view concentrated in one area. You've got like two or three in this city and two or three in that city and one in this small town in this other place. And it pretty much has to be online, where at least people can communicate with each other and share their ideas and kind of find some kind of sense of a tribe. I don't want to use Sangha because a traditionalist would consider only ordained monks and nuns to be Sangha. So, does alt-Buddhism really stand a chance? Sure, so long as anybody's practicing it. But, I mean, but standing a chance in the sense of just taking off and going mainstream or something, yeah, that would be a long shot, I think. So I'll just move on to the second part of the same question. I'm pretty sure. How do we go about building alt-Buddhist communities locally? Surely we need to have our own monasteries, temples, schools, and institutions and such. Well, yeah, I pretty much already answered that question. I think a good starting point is you've got a relatively simple, austere cabin, and then maybe a larger venue that, I mean, in a warm climate, it could just be like a roof on posts with some flooring that there could be Dhamma talks and meditation there, and then just invite a monk that you have respect for, you consider to be a good and venerable monk, to come and stay there and just sort of be the nucleus of this group. And if he's a good teacher and he's got charisma and so forth, then probably it'll attract more and more people. And you just do this in various areas wherever you have enough people with enough money that they can, and enough time to support the monk, because the monk is going to need support. He's going to have people bringing him food every day, or maybe a monastery attendant staying there who's going to be cooking his food every day. But a monk just can't wander around going for alms in most places in the West and live on that. So, yeah, I guess that's how you do it. That would make the most sense, because going the other route with sort of Navakavada, where you've got sort of a quasi-ordained Sangha that isn't really ordained. You know, they're wearing gray sweats and they've modified things a bit so that, you know, the ancient Indian stuff with regard to rules of etiquette and protocol and so forth can be set aside. And, you know, it's more in harmony with Western, you know, Western culture, Western society. I think that would be more difficult. I think the easiest way to get started would be, as I already mentioned, you just find, you know, a conservative traditionalist monk with wisdom who follows the rules, and you set up a little place for him to live. It doesn't have to be luxurious or fancy or beautiful. And so long as, you know, he's willing to come and stay there, you know, he becomes like the center of this little old Buddhist community. So I guess that'd be the most realistic way of doing it. But I mean, ultimately, probably if you had enough monks, or you had one monk like this who was influential enough, then he could be the catalyst for starting this quasi monasticism where you've got people wearing like gray sweats, and you know they don't completely avoid handling money, because I mean in the West that's not easy to do, not nearly as easy as in ancient India. So you know you just handle only what is necessary to handle that kind of a thing. Eat one meal a day, even though maybe you take what little money you've got and buy something for yourself. I don't know. It would depend on you know the vision of the people who are setting up this quasi sangha of semi renunciants, who would have the blessing of the Theravada Sangha, and they wouldn't be calling themselves bhikkhus. You know, they wouldn't make any pretense of being fully ordained, and really, I mean, it's not even necessary to be fully ordained, unless you're like an orthodox dogmatist who thinks that unless you're fully ordained, you cannot be enlightened for more than 24 hours without dying. So I guess that would be a realistic way of going about it. So I'm going to move on to the next question here. This is from Erain. And Erain says, would you consider Buddhism to be an atheistic religion? And I mean, it depends on your definition of atheistic. Atheistic would, I mean, literally means believing that there is no God. Or some people would include agnostics into atheism, and then just say, you know, somebody who at least doesn't assert that there is a God, or someone who just ignores God. But I'm just going to go with the literal meaning of atheism is just there is no God. And with regard to small g gods, yeah, Buddhism accepts the existence of small g gods who are simply beings that are higher up than we are. You know, they live longer, they have more psychic powers. You know, they're higher up on the scale than us humans. But with regard to an ultimate absolute God, Buddhism does not define the absolute as God. You know, it's nirvana, nibbana, or nibbana dhatu, which would be like nibbana or nirvana as a metaphysical state rather than just an ethical attainment, like a psychological state, practically. So, yeah, Buddhism, especially Theravada Buddhism, has been used as an example of an atheistic religion, where some people will define religion as, you know, a belief in God and, you know, like the worship of that God, which does apply through most religions, I guess, especially in the West. But yeah, Theravada Buddhism, also some system like Jainism, they are essentially religions, but they're not centered on worshiping a God. Like Buddhism acknowledges the existence of gods, but it doesn't encourage worshiping them because they got their own lives to lead. That's not what spirituality is all about, especially in Buddhism. So I guess I would consider Buddhism to be an atheistic religion, even though it does accept the conventional existence of small g gods, but even the small g gods are not ultimately real. But I mean, it's just a small step from the Buddhist concept of nirvana to like the Upanishadic concept of Brahman. And from the Hindu point of view, Brahman is God. So it's largely a matter of definitions and like semantics, vocabulary, whether you're going to call Nibbana God or not. But in Buddhism, Nirvana is not considered to be God. Mahayana Buddhists, some of them have essentially deified the Buddha so that he's like this cosmic God, you know, the most powerful God in our world system anyway. But yeah, I mean, originally Buddhism was atheistic. So, Irene's second question here: can you give your mother-in-law a shout out? I don't know why she wants me to yell at my mother-in-law, but okay. And she did give me this sweater though. It's for Christmas. It's really a nice sweater. So I'll just move on to the next question here. This is from Stevens. And please forgive me for the stage shout, or you don't want me really bellowing into this microphone. So, I mean, just consider that to be a shout. Next question is from Stevens. And Stevens says, there exists a left-hand path idea of trying to willfully destroy your samskaras by burning them out and causing vairagya. I don't know why Stevens is preferring Sanskrit here to Pali, but different strokes for different folks. I guess I should start back at the beginning here. There exists a left-hand path idea of trying to willfully destroy your samskaras by burning them out and causing vairagya. And vairagya is viraga in Pali, which means dispassion. This is the idea that at a certain point, actions that formerly caused us mind states of clinging and addiction cease to have an appeal or pull like they did, and therefore cease generating karma, because we realize the reality that the fruits of these actions are tainted by the three marks of existence. These marks are revealed by trying and repeatedly failing to find something permanent, something free of suffering, and something indicative of a self in the fruits of actions commonly held by mainstream society to be pleasurable or to yield pleasurable phenomena. In one famous example of this, Gurdjieff told a man who was struggling with a smoking addiction to quit smoking, then to start smoking again, but this time don't get addicted, quote unquote. I feel this profound parable contains the essence of left-hand path theurgy. Gurdjieff terms his way the way of the clever man, the path with the shortest practice time to enlightenment, similar to what Vajrayana practitioners think about tantric Buddhist practices. On the other side of the spectrum, Gurdjieff lists the asana-based practices of the fakir or the hatha yogi as the longest possible path to enlightenment, followed by metta-based practices of priests and devotional types, and then mindfulness and knowledge-based practices of monks and yanis. The practice second in speed and efficacy only to the left-hand path or the way of the clever man. What do Theravada and or its monks have to say about this, and what is your opinion or belief on the matter? Does this shorter, more dangerous path to enlightenment exist? For some people, this kind of thing it does exist and it can be quick, but it's much more dangerous because there are a lot of people who just fool themselves. They'll have sex a lot. They're sex addicts. And so they decide, well, I'll just make sex into a spiritual practice. I'll do tantra. And then they just wallow in sensuality. They think that they're doing some spiritual practice. They think they're doing tantra, but really they're sex addicts and they just can't get enough of it. So also there's one thing I would say here with regard to Gurdjieff's advice to the person who was smoking. I mean, and that he should quit smoking and then start smoking again, but this time not be addicted to it. I mean, that's not realistic because nicotine is like a physically addictive drug. If you take enough of it, you get addicted, regardless of your intentions or your attitude. So maybe he's just talking about mental addiction, but when you're physically addicted, you start going through withdrawals if you don't have the stuff that you're relying on. Then yeah, that's just addiction, regardless of your attitude, I think. But yeah, the left-hand path, it can work for some people, but the way it usually works is you've got a worldly person, and this, I mean, the Buddha was like this too. And he had, I mean, if we can believe the tradition, I mean, he had 3 palaces, one for the cold season, one for the hot season, one for the rainy season. His entire domestic staff was young women. He had essentially a harem of female servants and musicians and dancing girls. And anything he wanted, he got. And then he had enough wisdom to realize that even though he's got everything he wants, it's still not satisfying him. And that's one reason why Western monks are often more serious than Asian monks. Not only are they having to go against their tradition, but most Western monks have already, they've had their share of sensuality. They've had wine, women, and song. They've had sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and still they weren't satisfied. They realized that that is just not the way to be reliably happy. It's just up and down. It's a roller coaster ride. So then they just leave it behind. They don't just go into it deeper as a way of just burning out these attachments or whatever, because it's not necessary. Once you've wallowed in sensuality enough and have the wisdom to realize that it's really not making you a happier person, you might have more fun, but that's different from being, deeply satisfied and content. And also, it's just all this distraction is really, it's just a kind of illusion. You're just being distracted by illusions all around you. So generally the Theravadan approach, I mean, the Buddha took this route, is you wallow in the sensuality at first, and then you realize that it's just not getting you where you want to get, or it's not making you really happy, and then you let it go. You don't just keep wallowing in it, or you don't keep trying to use it as a tool because it's just kind of burned itself out, and so you move on to renunciation and asceticism. But some people who can just stay in it, it's like Osho would teach this kind of stuff. Paul Lode would teach this kind of stuff. To some degree, J. Krishnamurti would teach this. Just do whatever you want to do, but then, do it mindfully, do it with choiceless awareness, or just a clear mind, and just be aware of what you're doing and just feel the feelings that it causes and all that. But most people, like I said, they just get distracted and lost in it. So it can work quickly and effectively for some people just to do the tantric route, but more often than not, it's going to backfire. So, I mean, you got the semi-tantric route that I've already described, where you wallow in the sensuality until you finally realize that it's not making you really deeply happy. You know, it's not giving you what you want. So then you just let go of it and move on to something else, which is, you know, in early Buddhism, it's radical renunciation and austerity and meditation, self-restraint. So I guess I answered that. I mean, it's certainly the tantric route certainly isn't endorsed in Buddhism, but or at least not in early Buddhism. But I mean, it has worked for some people, I suppose. Seems to have worked fairly well for Paul Lowe. But anyway, I'll just move on to the next question here. This is from Joe Doe. And Joe Doe says, what does Buddha's swastika represent? And I really don't know what the original, like, symbolic meaning of the hooked cross. You know, it's like a plus sign with the edges kind of bent, and it goes the opposite direction of the German National Socialist swastika, although they took it from India. I mean, swastika is itself a Sanskrit word, and it means something like good welfare, you know, good benefit, something like that. The su is equivalent to like Greek EU. It means good. And astika is something with regard to, you know, benefit or welfare. So, I mean, it was like a good luck sign in ancient India. And, you know, the Buddha will have like it on his chest sometimes or on the palm of his hand sometimes. It's just like a sign of blessing or a good luck sign. But what the Hakenkreuz originally was supposed to represent, I'm not sure, if anything. It could have just been just an abstraction, or it could have been the sun. And there's a good chance it represented the sun. That's just a wild guess, though. So I guess I'll just move on to the next question from Joe Doe. How do you feel about the West becoming a white minority in 30 years? Well, I'll be 90 years old then. There won't be much I can do about it. He's assuming that I'm still alive. I don't think the entire West will become a white minority. That there's going to be, like Eastern Europe is going to be like a white enclave, and maybe someplace like Argentina. You know, there's going to be places that are still majority white. Probably some states, or at least some certain areas in the United States, will still be white majority. And if the white supremacists are correct, I'm not saying they are, but if the white supremacists are correct, they got nothing to worry about, because the superiority of the white ethnicity will cause them to rise up and not be trampled underfoot, so to speak. So, how do I feel about the West becoming a white minority in 30 years? Well, I mean, how I feel about it is just irrelevant. I mean, it's like it's not going to change anything. You know, it's just the way it is, apparently. I mean, it's not necessarily going to be the case that there's going to be a white minority in 30 years in, for example, the United States, because you never know. The white people with maybe some other, like, some other ethnicities just sort of team up and say, that's it, we've had enough. You know, we're going to do something about this and start mass deportations or something. It wouldn't surprise me. I mean, it would take some sort of radical upheaval. You know, maybe like the overthrowing of the U.S. Constitution or something towards the right instead of towards the left. I mean, the left are the ones who are really trying to just do away with the U.S. Constitution. But yeah, I mean, it's just, I mean, what's the point of being for it or against it or anything like that? I mean, by being against it, all you do is you just unnecessarily make yourself unhappy, because you're like, you know, at odds with the way things are. But who knows what's going to be like 30 years from now? I mean, it's impossible to really predict. You know, I defy any science fiction author to accurately portray what the West is going to be like 30 years from now. So you just be here now. I mean, that's good advice. Just be here now and don't worry about the future. Don't stew over the past. That this is where we are, right here, right now. The power of now. So 30 years from now, I mean, anything you imagine about what's going to be, what world the world is going to be like, what life is going to be like 30 years from now, it's almost certainly dead wrong. So let's move on to the next question here. This is from Buddha. And Buddha says, and I do not understand this question, I have to admit. Buddha says, being is human or human is being. Have you asked this? And no, I haven't asked it. Maybe I answered the question there. I know I haven't asked this. But I mean, it could be a play on words. It's like, is being used as a noun in one sense and as a verb in the other sense? Being is human? Well, being is human isn't necessarily true for all the beings that aren't human. But humans are beings, yeah. So human is being is more correct than being is human. Because not all being is human, but all human is being, I guess. So I really don't fully understand that question, even though it's a short, simple question. But yeah, the second part of this question is really easy. Have you asked this? And the answer is no, I haven't asked it. So I'll just move on to the next question here. This is from Pranav. And Pranav says, could you just speak about the dangers of samsara in your own style so I get motivated to practice well? The dangers of samsara. Well, I mean, the main dangers are inevitable suffering and delusion. Suffering and delusion are like the two main qualities of living an unenlightened life in samsara. So, I mean, if you don't mind being miserable and deluded, then I guess, I mean, everybody suffers because misery is part of being miserable, isn't it? There aren't very many people for whom misery makes them happy. I mean, there are some in a way. Some people just take a solace in their misery or just make it part of their life story. It's like their narrative. It's like part of who they are. This chronic ailment that they've had for 30 years, it's just become part of who they are. It's what they talk about. And I mean, they wouldn't know what to do if there was something cured of it. So there's some people that just enjoy being angry, that kind of thing. And that's just the delusion of just being stuck in this roller coaster ride of up and down, happy, unhappy. So the dangers of samsara. Yeah, I mean, the two main dangers is suffering, which means, I mean, we're all going to die, essentially, and delusion. We don't know the truth. We do not see reality. We're just like in this dream state. You know, we're just sort of wandering, we're sleepwalking. And I mean, most people are fine with that. That's why they're here, is because they want to be here. It's not that you don't become enlightened because you don't try hard enough. It's all of us, or practically all of us, most overwhelming majority of us are trying to stay unenlightened without even realizing it. We're just wallowing in it. We don't even want anything else for the most part. We think we'll be happy if we get the big screen TV set or the new car or something. But it doesn't really work that way. And it's weird how human nature is the way it is, where you think, well, if I get this, I'll be happy. And then you get like this rush of dopamine or whatever. So you are kind of happy when you get it, but then you start being unhappy again. So you think, well, I need that. And then you get that, and maybe another rush of dopamine, and then you're unhappy again. It's sort of like a drug addict where, you know, you feel good when you're high, and then you come down and you just want the next hit. But the danger of samsara, I guess, is death and you know, pain, sickness, old age, feebleness, you know, being separated from what you love, not getting what you want, getting what you don't want, and then just the accompanying delusion that is keeping your eyes closed, you know, keeping your eyes full of dust so that you cannot see ultimate reality, you cannot see the truth, you cannot see what is real. Because most people just assume that this, you know, with rooms and doors and books and mirrors and stuff. That this is reality, and it's just not. It's kind of like a dream state that we're in. But yeah, the main dangers are suffering or dukkha, pain, misery, sickness, all of that, and just delusion. And if you're okay with being unhappy and deluded, then, well, you got things set up. But if you don't particularly like misery and delusion, then Dhamma is about the best thing you can follow. Because even if you don't become fully enlightened, you're going to at least reduce your suffering and delusion. But I'm not sure if I really answered this question correctly. I don't know if I was really inspiring Pranav to just embark upon a radical spiritual practice. But for me, the main reason why I became a monk is I wanted to know reality. I wanted to know the truth. Other people, they're mainly going for cessation of suffering, but I was going for cessation of delusion as well as I could. And it's not so much the dangers of samsara, it's just that there's something much better than samsara. So, yeah, for me, I wasn't trying to escape from suffering so much as I was trying to just know reality. And I just noticed that I've got like these horizontal bars of light crossing my face and upper body because the sun is kind of going down and it's showing through the blinds. So maybe I should close the blinds a little better. There. That's much better, isn't it? Okay. So with all due respect to Pranav and his rather important, profound question here, I hope I did well enough. At present, I don't really have a lot of aversion for samsara. I don't have a lot of craving for it either. It's just this is where I'm situated right now, so we make the most of it and try to go through life as wisely and consciously as we can. And realize that desire is the cause of all suffering. And then once you have that in mind, do as thou wilt. So I'll just move on to the next question here. And this is from Kriel. And Kriel says, here is a question. What are your thoughts of non-duality or Neo-Advaita, which I guess are both modern versions of Advaita Vedanta? I was interested in them for quite some time in the past, but not anymore for two reasons. The first is that non-duality, in my opinion, emphasizes the non-existence of a self to the point of negating the importance of any effort performed for the sake of liberation. If there is no one to liberate kind of reasoning. While Buddhism gives right effort importance, the second is that non-duality, in my opinion, sees suffering as a purely subjective, subtly selling the illusion that after liberation life becomes a happy journey of love and light, while Buddhism, at least according to my understanding, sees suffering as both having a subjective and objective component. Birth is suffering, old age is suffering, etc. In other words, life has an inherent distressful quality in Buddhism, which non-duality does not properly describe, blaming all suffering to the person's inner delusions. Well, this is kind of a long, complicated question. With regard to Neo-Advaita, unless that's just like modern people talking about Advaita, I'm not sure how it would differ from Shankara. Or like, the original, Advaita literally means non-duality. And it's an interpretation of Vedanta or the Upanishadic tradition in India, the Upanishads. So non-duality just means that reality is not divided up into this and that. That it's like monism, a radical monism or mysticism. So, but I guess it wouldn't necessarily be mysticism because you can have just philosophers who aren't mystics who are just philosophizing about it. But so really this Neo-Advaita, um, yeah, I don't have a lot of experience with it other than like, for example, in Mahayana Buddhism or in the Upanishads. I mean, I have been exposed to that. I have read a lot of that kind of stuff, read all the major Upanishads and probably all of the major Mahayanist stuff, except for maybe Pure Land. So let's see. I was interested in them for quite some time in the past, but not anymore for two reasons. So let's see. Maybe I should divide this up, make it a little easier for me. Okay. Non-duality, in his opinion, emphasizes the non-existence of a self to the point of negating the importance of any effort performed for the sake of liberation. Yeah, well, I mean, the thing, I tried to explain this before, that there really is no self to liberate, but what you got, I mean, I'm just sort of maybe flogging a dead horse here, but you got the block of marble. You got this block of marble sitting on a featureless plane. So the block of marble, because you got nothing else to compare it with, may as well just be sizeless, arbitrary size. And contained within that block of marble is every possible statue, including pretty much every impossible statue. It's all in there all at the same time. It's just superimposed one on top of the other. Every single molecule of every statue is already there in the right place. You just have to omit the extraneous rock in order to have that statue, but the statue is already there. A sculptor, he's just liberating what's already there in the rock. So some of these statues are so complicated that they become self-aware. And they think that they are real, and they think that they are separate from everything else. But, I mean, it's a virtual statue with this virtual belief that it is an individual self and that it is dealing with a reality. So, I mean, really, the path to liberation is just using this delusional, recursive mentality to cure itself of its own delusion so that it just fades back into the block of marble. So, I mean, it's delusion liberating itself. There's no being that is liberating himself or herself or itself. It's just the delusion that it's separate, curing itself by whatever means, introspection, mindfulness, detachment, just this virtual belief system, which is really right there. I mean, it's one of the possible statues. It's just as real as any other, but it's not ultimately real. It's just virtually, conditionally real. And it's this delusion that has to cure itself. So it's kind of hard to explain. It really is. It's hard to grasp it. So let's see here. Buddhism does give right effort importance, but it's just a matter of emphasis or like perspective. I mean, essentially, it's the same kind of thing on both sides. It's just Buddhism is more practical. Maybe that's the point. Buddhism is more practical, whereas Advaita is more philosophical. It's just kind of mind blowing, and it's just you become enlightened largely through just having your mind blown. This jnana yoga, the yoga of knowledge. Whereas Buddhism is more Raja yoga, which is the yoga of practice. So let's see here. His second reason for not having much use for non-duality is that, in his opinion, it sees suffering as purely subjective, subtly selling the illusion that after liberation, life becomes a happy journey of love and light, while Buddhism, at least according to his understanding, sees suffering as both having a subjective and objective component. In other words, life has an inherently distressful quality in Buddhism, which non-duality does not properly describe, blaming all suffering on the person's inner delusions. Well, I mean, both are right. I mean, it is, it's like the delusion that this is real, that we are separate, we've got this separate, ultimately real self. I mean, that's all there is the delusion. And so it is subjective because it's the delusion that is the problem. And the delusion is subjective. So, I mean, after liberation, it's not really a happy journey of love and light. There's no more journey. You know, after liberation, I mean, I mean, unenlightenment is the journey. Once you become enlightened, the journey is pretty much over, it seems to me. Or it's just, it would be just neutral, just sort of the empty set in a sense. So, yeah, I mean, I'm not exactly sure what the question is here. What are my thoughts on non-duality or Neo-Advaita? It's more, it's in a way more cerebral than Buddhism. I mean, Buddhism is plenty cerebral, but Advaita it's like the spiritual path is of just philosophy. It's just blowing your mind through profundity. Whereas Buddhism does have like more of the practical guidelines of how you do, how you practice, how to meditate and so forth. So yeah, I mean, I'm no expert on Neo-Advaita because frankly I'd never even heard the term Neo-Advaita until I came across this question. I mean, Advaita I know, which is just um, like Upanishadic philosophy interpreted in a non-dualistic way. But it's all God, all Brahman. Thou art that. Tat Tvam Asi. But we're getting some real, like, subtle, deep questions that are not easy to answer today. So I guess I'll just move on to the next question here. This is from Hereward the Wake. And Hereward the Wake says, the following question is occasioned by your talk, the interview with Bhante G. Varapanyo on Buddhism-flavored social justice and what to do about it on July 25th, 2021, except it's not about social justice, but the part which focused on alcohol, which I don't remember is a few years ago. I mean, I remember the video, I just don't remember the part what we were talking about, alcohol. But anyways, Hereward the Wake continues. I know that Tibetan medicine recommends alcohol as being medicinal in small quantities. Some people indeed go further, such as the late philosopher Roger Scruton in I Drink, Therefore I Am, A Philosopher's Guide to Wine, 2009. And on page 132 it says, it is true, as I have suggested, that wine sheds a certain light into the inwardness, the Atman of contingent things, and it points towards, without providing, another way in which being might be known, unquote. I will leave to one side the question of the existence of the Atman, exclamation point. What is your advice on taking alcohol, whether or not and how much, for Buddhist laymen? Okay. So, I mean, it's the fifth precept is taking ale, wine, and other intoxicants which cause cloudedness of mind or which cause heedlessness. And, I mean, it's just right there in black and white that to drink alcohol is a violation of the fifth precept. So, regardless of any benefits you might get from drinking alcohol, I mean, it's a violation of the fifth precept. So if you are a Buddhist and you do drink alcohol, and a lot of Buddhists do, I had 2 beers last night. Didn't get drunk, but I had 2 beers. I mean, you're just breaking the precept. You have to acknowledge that you're not following the precept correctly. I mean, I've met some guys in Burma. They're telling me, I follow 2.5 precepts, which is better than nothing. At least they know they're breaking the precept. They're not being dishonest with themselves and trying to use some kind of, was it casuistry? Is that a word? Casuistry, where they're just making excuses for breaking the rule and saying that they're not really breaking it. Like monks who are handling credit cards or something and say they're not handling money because it's plastic. Or monks, some Mahayana monks, they'll eat a meal in the afternoon and they'll call it medicine meal. I stayed briefly at a Mahayana monastery before I was ordained, and they'd have dinner every evening and call it the medicine meal because, of course, they're not supposed to be eating in the afternoon, and so they say, well, it's medicine. Or like monks who keep extra clothes, They're not supposed to do that, but they say it's accessory cloth. It's not a robe, it's accessory cloth, and then they just wear it as a robe. It's obviously a robe. So I mean, that kind of stuff is getting into the realm of dishonesty, in my opinion. Whereas, I mean, if you try to come up with clever excuses for drinking alcohol, it's medicinal. It's not booze, it's medicine. Then, yeah, I mean, you're just kind of deceiving yourself. You might not deceive anybody else, but at least you're deceiving yourself. And I mean, you might as well just take the hit. It's like, well, I'm breaking this rule. I'm not following the 5 precepts completely. I might be following 4 precepts, but not all 5. And there's nothing horribly wrong with that. I don't think there's anything necessarily immoral in having 1 or 2 drinks. You don't even get drunk. There might be nothing more than just like a subliminal little glow going after like 2 drinks. But I'm not much of a lightweight, so I can, even before I became a monk, I could handle my liquor pretty well. I was sober all the way down to the floor. So, yeah, that would be my advice on taking alcohol for a Buddhist layperson is if you're going to take it, then you just acknowledge that you're breaking the precept. So I think I'll just move on to Hereward the Wake's next question, which is there a meditation manual you can recommend? And one of the meditation manuals or books on meditation that impressed me the most was, I think it's The Heart of Buddhist Meditation by Venerable Nyanaponika. Venerable Nyanaponika, who was a German monk. He was a disciple of Nyanatiloka, who was also a German monk way back like in the 1940s. So yeah, it's about Satipatthana. It's essentially a commentary on the Mahasatipatthana Sutta. Another good book on meditation is Joseph Goldstein's The Experience of Insight. Those 2 kind of stand out in my memory as good meditation guides. But I mean, the standard meditation manual for a Theravada Buddhist would be the Visuddhimagga, ideally Nyanamoli's translation. So, but I mean, the Visuddhimagga, I don't think that Buddhaghosa was much of a meditator. My experience with scholar monks who are, sitting in rooms writing out learned treatises like commentaries is they generally are not into like austerity and like intensive meditation. Some of them are, but most of them are not. So if you're going to read a meditation manual, it's good to read a meditation manual from a meditation master and not a scholar. Another good meditation manual that I don't remember the title of it. I got it from the Buddhist Publication Society, but it's like a transcript of what all yogis or meditators would have to hear when they would attend a Mahasi retreat. This is like back in the 1970s when Mahasi Sayadaw was still alive. And just about anything by Mahasi Sayadaw on practicing mindfulness meditation is going to have a lot of useful practical information in it. But if you want a manual that tells you like how to do all the different kinds of meditation, not just mindfulness meditation or satipatthana, then you might start with the Visuddhimagga, because I don't know of any other meditation manuals that give like the full spectrum of all the different meditation techniques, most of which nobody much practices anymore, like the contemplating decomposing corpses in a charnel field. Not very many people do that anymore. Or most of the kasina meditations aren't practiced anymore, where you're just meditating on a colored disc or a disc of earth or whatever. You can meditate on one of the four elements, earth, water, wind, and fire through kasina meditation also. And most people just don't do it anymore. I mean, mainly most meditation manuals you come across, especially in the West, would be on mindfulness meditation, or so-called vipassana, although I never liked using the term vipassana for mindfulness meditation or satipatthana. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Harim Kathul. And Harim Kathul says, "Forgive me my insolence, but does your life not show that Buddhism leads nowhere?" Is the path to liberation not better sought through acceptance of both light and darkness rather than rejection of them? People you consider enlightened are usually far from being solemn Buddhists. And somebody else commented below this on the YouTube video, and they were saying that watching my videos where I explain Buddhism has confirmed him to some degree in this, that Buddhism leads nowhere, which is kind of disappointing that I'm actually causing people to lose faith in Buddhism. But there are a few misconceptions here. One is that the path, he says here, is the path to liberation not better sought through acceptance of both light and darkness rather than rejection of them? I mean, what do you think of a monk who is a radical renunciant, like living in a jungle? Do you think he's rejecting both light and darkness? I mean, he's an ascetic, you know? I mean, how does an ascetic reject both light and darkness? So, I mean, that in itself strikes me as a misconception. But another thing here is, I mean, Buddhism, he says, does not my life show that Buddhism leads nowhere? I mean, where is it supposed to lead? You know, it's like, be here now. I mean, where does be here now lead? It doesn't lead anywhere. You know, this is all we got is right here, right now. So where is it supposed to lead to? The enlightenment of some being who doesn't ultimately exist? So, I mean, that's kind of a strange point too. But this path of liberation, is it not better sought through acceptance of both light and darkness? I mean, that's sort of like what Stevens above was talking about with regard to the left-hand path. I mean, you take that too far and you've got Tantra, and it usually doesn't work because you just get lost in it. You're surrounded by distractions, which ultimately, eventually distract you and just lead you astray. And that's, 10 years later, you realize that you haven't been practicing correctly. So, people you consider enlightened are usually far from being solemn Buddhists. Well, I mean, you don't have to be solemn to be a Buddhist. I mean, like in ancient India, then, yeah, I mean, they had this cultural thing going where, I mean, you were like strict ascetic, just complete renunciant, and it was like you would not tolerate any kind of like sentimentality or anything like that. It's just like, it's cold, just ice cold, strict. It's like, according to Abhidhamma, an enlightened being just cannot laugh or cry. And I kind of doubt that. I mean, I'm a Buddhist, but I mean, you don't have to believe all of this just really strict, straight-laced, ancient Indian stuff. It's not really the essence of Buddhism. The essence of Buddhism is essentially just accept whatever happens, and it makes it easier to accept both light and darkness if you're in kind of a controlled situation, sort of like the way scientific experiments work, where you have to have a controlled situation, because, I mean, you can't just have it wide open chaos and get progress. So you do simplify the situation to make it easier to accept both light and darkness, and you're not rejecting light and darkness, other than you're just simplifying it enough so that you can make progress. And I mean, to say that Buddhism leads nowhere, I mean, is reduced suffering and reduced delusion nowhere? I mean, maybe. I mean, where is reduced suffering? It's not over yonder. It's not over yonder. So, I'm really not sure exactly how to answer questions like this. Maybe you've noticed that from the way I'm kind of wandering around in this answer. I feel that Buddhism leads nowhere. Well, I mean, if you want to assume that less suffering and less delusion is nowhere, that it's just not worth having, then yeah, it's your call. I mean, if you want to be unhappy and deluded, nobody is stopping you. But you're trying to, maybe this person is, implying that you get better reduction of unhappiness and delusion by acceptance of both light and darkness, which of course Buddhism does teach. I mean, you just accept whatever happens. I mean, that's pretty much what Kanti is. It's one of the 10 paramis. Kanti literally means acceptance. So, I mean, upeka also is a kind of acceptance. It's not sort of a grasping kind of, taking something in acceptance, but it's just, you're at peace with whatever happens. And Buddhist monks, I mean, they're at peace with whatever happens. Supposedly, you read the text, they can be getting, their arms and legs chopped off. All these things could happen to them. They're living in dangerous jungles full of bandits and tigers and so forth. And I mean, it's not like they're just hiding in a monastery trying to avoid any light or darkness. So, I mean, different people require different paths, I suppose. One size does not fit all. But I'm not sure if I even answered this question yet. I'm just going to read it again. Because, like I said, the questions this time are, I don't know, they're higher difficulty level, some of them. Forgive me my insolence, but does your life not show that Buddhism leads nowhere? I mean, in what way would my life show that? I mean, am I worse off for being a Buddhist? I don't get that part. Is the path to liberation not better sought through acceptance of both light and darkness rather than rejection of them? Yeah, within reason. I mean, you follow the middle path. You don't just wallow in self-indulgence, which is one extreme, and you don't torture yourself, wallow in self-torture, which is the other extreme. You just live your life, take what comes, and you deal with it wisely. And simplifying things makes it easier to do that so that you don't get distracted or just knocked off your feet. It's the middle path. Anyways, I don't know if I've answered that or not. I'm just going to move on to the next question here. This is from Yuga U. And Yuga U says, do you think that practice, fake it till you make it, can be part of right view? Well, I don't think it would be part of right view because he says it's like a practice. So it'd be more like right practice. Fake it till you make it. I mean, to some degree, I mean, if you want to be an arahant, to imitate an arahant, to superficially, outwardly try to live like an arahant is not a bad idea. I mean, it might not fit you at all. You might just be hysterical and just climbing the walls like some people do at meditation retreats, where just the sensory deprivation and the self-restraint and everything in slow motion and silence and not talking with people, they just can't handle it and they crack up. I mean, that does happen. But to the extent that you can imitate an enlightened being, then yeah, it'll help you to go in that direction. But fake it till you make it doesn't mean that you just pass yourself off as an enlightened being, just becoming a fraud. Yeah, that's not good either. But to try to imitate an enlightened being is fine. It's like Christians try to live a Christ-like life. I mean, it makes sense. Even though they themselves are not particularly Christ-like, at least they're trying, and it probably brings them a little closer to being Christ-like. Same way with Buddhism. So, I'm going to move on to the next question here, and this is from White Ash Piper. And White Ash Piper says, do you think putting an animal down, and then in parentheses he's got dog, takes away from their death experience? I guess, I mean, in some cases, but then again, not all death experiences are all that great. Yeah, I mean, just dying in your sleep might be taking away from your own death experience, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't die in your sleep. Yeah, it's in a way, it's the only bad karma in euthanizing an animal would be in your own sort of, you're meddling with some other being's karma, and it's just the effect that it has on your own mind, just sort of residual doubts, or the subconscious effect of cutting off another life force deliberately, something like that. It's subtle, and I mean, Buddhism, like ancient Indian Buddhism, is uncompromising. Euthanasia is still killing, but I mean, sometimes, I mean, it's just better to take the hit. I mean, as a layperson, it's sort of like the stoicism of like alt-Buddhism. I've talked about this in like blog posts where, I mean, if you can live the life of a saint, but live the life of a saintly renunciant, yeah, well, you can go ahead and do that. But if you're a layperson, you've got like a family to protect, for example, you've got a home to defend if necessary, then you have to take the hit. You have to say, just have to bravely face the fact that you are setting yourself up for some bad fruition in the future by doing these things, but it's your duty to do them. And so you just have to have a little bravery to face the fact that, you know, you're going to be taking a hit later on by doing this. So for a layperson, I think in some cases, euthanasia, not only of a dog, but maybe even of grandma, I mean, it's not all bad. It's going to be, I mean, there is no pure bad or pure good, unless you're like an enlightened being, and then just good and bad are just, you know, the whole duality is just set aside, and that's like a higher good. But I mean, if you're doing it out of compassion and the dog is suffering, then you may be taking a hit, but on the same, you know, by the same token, you know, you're doing something, you're doing a compassionate act, which is going to have some positivity in it too. And taking away from their death experience, I mean, dying in misery is not a good experience. It's like if you die in a state of misery, then that misery is bad karma. Like the more you're miserable, the more bad karma you're making. It's actually, in Buddhism, it is immoral to be unhappy because you're making more karma. You're sort of reinforcing the unhappiness by just adding to it. So it's not necessarily bad to take away their death experience. I mean, you might just want to anesthetize them, give them some painkiller or something, and then just let nature take its course. But I mean, if it's just a long, lingering death, I can imagine situations where just putting them out of their misery is actually, I mean, it can arguably even be more good than bad. But there's going to be some good mixed in with the bad anyway. And you just have to face the fact that, I mean, you're going to face the consequences of everything you do. Every volitional act is going to have consequences. So I kind of punted the ball on that one, didn't I? I'm not sure that I really even answered it. Sometimes I can sit here and talk for 5-10 minutes, and when I'm done, still not sure if I even answered the question. But taking away from their death experience is not necessarily a bad thing, because some death experiences can be particularly icky. And if they don't experience it, then it just wasn't their karma to experience it after all. But then that leads into, you know, murder victims and so forth. So let's not even go there. I'm moving on to the next question immediately. This is from Popcorn Boxing. And Popcorn Boxing, with regard to the previous Q&A, says, I am glad it recorded this time. Would you have redone it if it had not recorded again? And yeah, I'd have to say, yeah, I'd have to do it a third time. Because I'm not just going to like, well, it didn't work, so I'm not answering the questions. Or I could skip a week and then I'd have like 80 questions to answer. So, yeah. I'm glad I didn't have to do it a third time, but I probably would have. So the next question, we got a few kind of unusual questions here. And this is from Va China is coming bitch cute. And VC here says, when you were a monk for 30 years, did you no-fap the whole time? Was it hard? And I mean, yeah, I mean, it's strictly against the rules for a monk to deliberately have an orgasm, unless it's while he's asleep in a dream. And if you break that rule, then you have to take penance for 6 days and 6 nights. It's called a Samsara offense. It's the most serious level of offense after excommunication. And then after you've done the required penance, which is difficult and inconvenient, you have to attend a ceremony with at least 20 other monks, all in good standing, to reinstate you as a monk in good standing. And it's really a pain in the neck. And there were times when, I mean, you know, I'm a guy, and especially when I was younger, I mean, sometimes I would be so horny, I'd just be climbing the walls. I'd want to just cry or howl like a dog or something. I was so horny. But I mean, jerking off was not really a viable option unless I was just going to become an unconscientious monk and not confess my offenses and just pretend like I didn't have them and so forth, which was not a route I wanted to take. So there were times when you're just really horny and you're not intending to jerk all the way off. You're not spanking the puppy. You're just kind of petting it a little bit, and then it's just you're so overcharged, so to speak, that it's like playing with a gun and it goes off. That happened a few times, and in really doubtful occasions, I'd be like psychoanalyzing myself. I mean, did I have any intention to do this? And if you just have doubt, in order to resolve the doubt, I would just do the penance anyway. But it's really a pain in the neck. Best avoided, especially if you're a monk. So anyway, the next part of this question here. Now that you have a sweat fart, that's not a very nice way to refer to a lady. Are you doing no-fap? If not, when will you? Will she be okay with it? Have you spoken with her about tits? And I assume he said, I assume that's a typo, and that he meant to say this, and it was like a Freudian slip or something. Man, I mean it. And then he says, I mean it, question mark. So, am I doing no-fap? No, I'm not doing, I mean, no-fap literally means no masturbation. So I guess, yeah, I'm doing no masturbation because I don't even need to. I got a woman who has needs also. So, if not, when will you? Well, if my sweetheart passes away before I do, God forbid, so to speak, inshallah, or if I just get too old to get it up, then yeah, I guess so. But when you have a partner and you're sleeping in the same bed with her, then yeah, I mean, you have sort of a responsibility to at least try to make her happy in certain ways. It's just a natural urge anyway, right? I mean, if you don't want to do that stuff, I mean, be celibate is fine, but I'm not celibate anymore. So let's see here. Have I spoken with her about this? I don't recall it because I have no intention of doing it. I mean, would she be okay with it? I don't think so. No, I don't think she'd be okay with that. So, okay. I think I answered that little series of questions that were sub-questions. See, we got 1, 2, 3, 4 question marks in that one question. So now I'll just move on to this next question, which is another kind of strange one. Also on the topic of no-fap. What age does a person not get credit for no-fap? For example, 88-year-old people I do not think have sex or masturbate, so it is like going to a hoe house with a chopped off dick and getting reward in heaven for not having dick sex with the hoes. Even guys who are married do no-fap. Women go crazy because they think they control you because you are always ready and they are not. So now you are not always ready like her, even though you are, but you are no-fap, so you are once again in control. Yeah, my relationship really doesn't work that way. I'm happy to say. But let's just get up to the main question up here. What age does a person not get credit for no-fap? I mean, it's like there is no age limit. I mean, when you hit 65, it's not like you start getting Social Security and you stop getting credit for no-fap. It's like when the urge goes away, then of course you're no longer restraining yourself. So if you get too old to have the urge, then I guess you're not getting credit for not doing what you don't have the urge for anymore. And for some people that got really weak sex drives, I mean, that can be pretty much their entire life. But I mean, if you're really just a lustful person, then yeah, I mean, so long as you're a lustful person, then I mean, it's not really credit. I mean, it's just sort of you're practicing self-restraint and you're, I assume you're getting good karma for the self-restraint. But I mean, it is like a spiritual practice. You are weakening your karmic urges by self-restraint. So I guess I answered that question. I mean, when when you're no longer really practicing self-restraint because you no longer have the urge to do it, then you're really not doing anything. You're not accomplishing anything. You're not earning anything. So I'll just move on to the next question. And this is from RCats. And RCats says, RCats, I say, says, hi, I've been practicing Buddhism for 4 or so years, starting in Tibetan and following strictly Ajahn Sona and Bhikkhu Bodhi. I agree with Buddha's view on becoming free, but I am stuck with thinking if all humans can't become enlightened due to many people making the world run, including having children, then are his teachings realistic? I feel everyone is entitled to liberation, but there's many other necessary ways of living that won't provide people with the situations to become liberated. And also the monastics wouldn't survive without lay people. It really makes my view of Buddhist teachings being ultimate create doubt. Well, I mean, like I was saying earlier, most people don't even want to become liberated. Most people are just wallowing in it. They have no concept of liberation. Even if they had a concept, they wouldn't want it. So it is realistic because liberation is only for a few people. I mean, if you've got a system that says everyone gets liberated, like some kinds of Christianity, where all you got to do is believe in Jesus and you're saved, that is not realistic. So it's realistic to say that most people just aren't ripe. They're just not ready for it. But you can do what you can to at least get closer to it. You can make progress towards liberation, and that's what most Buddhists are going for. They're too humble or just too honest with themselves to think that they're going to try, that they're got much of a chance of becoming enlightened in this life. Maybe a little too humble in some cases. I mean, you shouldn't just shut the door to the very idea of becoming enlightened in this life, because you never know what's going to happen. So let's see. I feel everyone is entitled to liberation. Well, I guess you could say everyone's entitled to it, but most people don't want it. So, I mean, everyone's entitled to go out and pee in the snow, but not everybody wants to pee in the snow. To give kind of a weird example. Just because, yeah, it's just kind of a strange statement here. Ajahn Sona is a good monk, though. He's the abbot of Birken Forest Monastery in British Columbia in Canada. Let's see. Stuck with thinking if all humans can't become enlightened due to too many people making the world run, including having children, then are his teachings realistic? Yeah, that makes them realistic because most people just don't want liberation. And I feel everyone is entitled to liberation, but there's many other necessary ways of living that won't provide people with situations to become liberated. Well, that's their choice. Or else they just don't know. And also the monastics wouldn't survive without lay people, that's fine. But I mean, most people just don't want to become monastics anyway. So yeah, I think that the very fact that very few people become enlightened makes it more realistic. I mean, Christianity originally was that way. You know, many are called, but few are chosen. That even most Christians, I mean, like, I think it's St. Augustine just admitted that even most Christians are going to go to hell. I mean, is that realistic? I mean, what's more realistic than admitting that just most people not only are not going to make it, most people don't even want to make it? So I'll just move on to the next question here. This is from Keep the Vinya. And Keep the Vinya says, what are chakras and do you believe in them? I've read a lot about chakras. You know, Ram Dass, I mentioned a lot. He was like one of my first teachers through books when I was a teenager. You know, he talked about chakras because he was trained mainly in a Hindu tradition. And chakras are like Hindu. It's a Hindu concept. Buddhism, like Orthodox Theravada, doesn't talk about chakras at all. Probably in China, they got their own systems. So yeah, chakras are kind of unique as far as I know. You know, the 7 chakras, you know, you've got the, I mean, I'm no authority on chakras, but you've got like the one that's at the root of your tailbone, kind of the root of the penis for guys, I guess. Or is that right? Yeah. It's just survival. You know, it's like the lowest level of mentality where you're actually conscious, is just survival, food and shelter and this kind of a thing. And then the second, which is just above that, kind of below, intermediate between the first chakra and like your belly button, the dantian, I guess it's called in Chinese, that's like the sexual chakra. So that's first chakra is just survival, second is sex, third is kind of in the belly, or I mean it's all these chakras are like along your spinal column. There's like a spiritual equivalent of your spinal column, and the chakras are like nodes going up this energy column. And the third one is like status and power, money, that kind of a thing. And the Ram Dass says that most normies, like most people who aren't very spiritual, never really get above the third chakra. That the first three chakras, which is just survival, sex, and just status and power, that kind of a thing. That that's like the world for most people. And then the fourth chakra is the heart chakra, which is compassion, where you start realizing that everybody else is on me. It's like that we're all kind of connected. And then I'm starting to really get into the realm I'm not really familiar with. Then there's like the throat chakra is the fifth one, and then like the third eye is the sixth one, and then the crown of the head is the seventh chakra. When that opens, you're fully enlightened. And I don't think there's any scientific basis for this, any empirical basis. It's a belief system that works. So that gives it some validity, like pragmatic validity, that it's like a way of dealing with different levels of consciousness, sort of like Ken Wilber uses like the color code thing for different stages of consciousness. It's kind of similar to that. It's just sort of like a gimmick that got turned into like a religious dogma. If somebody can prove to me that these chakras really exist, that's fine. But I mean, even if they don't have like a scientific empirical reality, the fact that it's a way of helping people to wrap their heads around different levels of consciousness, and it's used as a tool to help them make progress, that's fine. Sort of like Abhidhamma works for some people, Chinese, like the Chinese equivalent to this, or Ayurvedic equivalents to understanding how the body works, even though it might not be verified by Western science, still, I mean, it's sort of like a gimmick that works. So, yeah. So, I mean, I kind of have a general idea of what chakras are. And I really don't have much trouble using the system, talking about chakras, even though I'm not exactly sure what the throat chakra does, especially. Anybody who's an authority on throat chakras is welcome to leave a comment in the comments below. So I'll just move on to the second question from Keep the Vinya, which is, what does it mean if all things are empty? And different schools of Buddhism will teach you different things, but I think the original meaning of sunyata, or emptiness, shunyata in Sanskrit, is that everything is empty of an individual self-essence. That it's just kind of arbitrary, or it's ultimately delusional to think that anything is intrinsically separate from anything else. It's an artifact of perception. Differentiation, papancha, is an artifact of perception. Taking it seriously, thinking that it represents reality, is a delusion. So, I mean, it's not like in Platonic philosophy where, like a cell phone is like pervaded by this essence of cell phoneness. No, I don't think so. Even Schopenhauer believed in this Platonic ideals, and yeah, they don't exist, in my opinion. That in Buddhism, it's like something appears to exist so long as that there are these conditions surrounding it that cause it to appear to exist, and each of those conditions itself appears to exist because of it's just this vast, unthinkable web of conditions, that none of which is ultimately real. It's just to have a system that's going to stay stable for at least a trillionth of a second. You have to have some kind of like reinforcing pattern to it. And so in the block of marble, the uncarved block, you've got these various patterns that lend a certain stability to the whole of the pattern just through a kind of regularity or predictability. It's really hard to explain this kind of stuff. I mean, I'm just sort of just blundering into this in a way, trying to explain this, and it's not working very well. But I mean, ultimately, things are empty because they lack an individual self essence, including people. And that's why Buddhism teaches there is no self ultimately, because a self would be like an ultimately real self essence, like a soul. And Buddhism says that there is nothing, not a grain of sand, not a human being, not a planet, not a sun, that has an individual self essence. That it's all the uncarved block that is artificially divided up into parts, but the parts are not ultimately real. They're just conditionally or provisionally or potentially or virtually real. And yeah, like, read the Mula Madhyamaka Karaka if you want to understand emptiness. I mean, according to the Mula Madhyamaka Karaka, dependent co-arising is emptiness. Because, I mean, things don't exist because they have this inherent existence. They exist or seem to exist because of all these conditions causing that to exist. And if the conditions stop, the thing itself that you think is ultimately real or has some sort of inherent individuality also stops. So I hope I answered that question. I mean, you can write entire books on it, which Nagarjuna did. And many other people have also written on the topic of emptiness. But I mean, what it means is that everything is empty of an individual self-essence. That it just seems to exist because conditions cause it to seem to exist. And those conditions also just seem to exist because other conditions cause them to seem to exist ad infinitum. So I'll just move on to the last question, which is really the last question, the very last question, which was asked like half an hour before I sat down to do this. And this is from Mama. And Mama says, what are the top 3 easiest things you would recommend with regard to incorporating Dharma into your daily life? And I'm sorry to say it, but number 1 would be get rid of your TV set. Just don't watch television. And it's mainly the commercials. I mean, if you can watch television without commercials and without like Netflix, like neo-Marxist propaganda, you know, like even, I mean, I watched the Walking Dead, pretty much binge watched it, you know, all 11 seasons of it in rapid succession. And I mean, it's, yeah, I mentioned this before. It's essentially, it's a good story, but there's all this propaganda in it. Some of my favorite movies, like The Matrix, it's got propaganda in it. It's, you know, it's like the toughest badass in the whole movie is this attractive young woman. You know, what are the odds? Especially when it's like just about every action movie has one of these. And then like The Walking Dead, it's like around season 7, it was like all like at least 1/4 of the main characters were homosexual. It's like black people are running most of the communities, and there's nothing wrong with black people, but it's just not very realistic. Like there's this one community called Hilltop. The first, like when you're first introduced to Hilltop, the leader is this totally weaselly white guy, and then he gets eliminated. He's replaced by a woman, a white woman, and then she goes off, does her own thing. She's replaced by a gay guy. And then he gets killed and he's replaced by a lesbian woman. It's just like, you know, is this just random chance that it's always like this? You know, I'm not even really complaining. I mean, like The Walking Dead, it's worth watching. I mean, if you're into zombies, I mean, The Walking Dead has good slow zombies. I mean, fast zombies, I mean, they'd just be screwed. But slow zombies are manageable, I guess. But of course, I'm just totally totally digressing here because Mama asked about the 3 easiest things you would recommend regarding incorporating Dharma into your daily life. And here I am talking about zombies. So, number 1, get rid of your TV set. 2, I mean, the top 3 easiest things, man. I mean, I should have probably just figured this out before I did the video, but I usually try to do this thing, just spontaneously and not through some rehearsed speech. So another thing, be aware of the 5 precepts so that even if you're breaking one, at least you know you're breaking one. I mean, if you're a Buddhist, I mean, if you're not a Buddhist, then it's not that big of a deal. I mean, if you're a Christian, drinking alcohol is no big deal because Jesus drank alcohol, which kind of helps to indicate that drinking alcohol isn't really all that horrible. It's not going to disqualify you from being a wise person. But let's see. Maybe do a little meditation, even for just 5 minutes a day. 5 minutes is better than 0 minutes. So get rid of your TV set. Try to keep what precepts that you can keep. Although, like I said, I drank 2 beers last night, which is more than I usually drink, but still. And maybe just try to do a little bit of meditation. Or another one would just be try to just practice some elementary mindfulness. There's certain things that you do every day, like brushing your teeth. You can just turn that into a little mindfulness ritual. It'd be like meditation where you're brushing your teeth mindfully. You're aware of the pressure of your hand against the toothbrush. You're aware of the muscles causing it to go up and down. You're aware of the brushing noises. You're aware of the sensations on your teeth and gums. You're aware of the thoughts that arise while you're doing it, like maybe I should emphasize this tooth a little more, that kind of a thing. Or just walking. Just walking can be a meditative experience. Or another one is like simple mindfulness of, like, if you get irritated or annoyed, like you're driving a car and you get irritated by someone who, they just cut you off or something, just be aware of the irritation arising so that you don't just get swept away by it. There's all kinds of little things you can do. And I think the 3 easiest things that each person can do to incorporate Dharma into their life, it would depend a lot on their own personality. What is it that works best for them? But number 1 is get rid of your TV set. And I'm kind of a hypocrite because we've got TV sets in this house. In fact, there's 3 of them, although only one of them is really hooked up. And I've been just like steadfastly resisting there's one that's already in the bedroom that my sweetheart put there. And she wants a TV in the bedroom, and I've just been resisting the whole time because personally I'd be happier if there was no TV sets at all in this house. But when you live with another person, you have to compromise to some degree. So one TV that actually works is in the living room. And then the TV that's in the bedroom is, I don't think it's even plugged in. So, another easy thing to incorporate Dharma into your daily life is just be generous. Just help people in need. If you got more than them and they need it more than you, then, share the wealth, I guess. There's lots of little things you can do that can really make a difference. So what the top 3 would be for each individual person, like I say, would probably depend on the individual person and just kind of what their strengths and weaknesses are, so that something that's easy for one person might be difficult for another. Just like generosity, for example. Some people are just naturally generous. Some people are not. So, yeah, I guess that's it. And so I answered all the questions. And it's less than 2 hours even. By golly. So if you got any questions, feel free to include them in the comments below this video and look at the URL links, including the books I've got on Amazon. And I just burped. Here I am ending this with a belch. But yeah, like and subscribe if you haven't already, and be happy.